Hey, what's up, guys? We're back. This is the Independent Musician Podcast, and I have a new guest with me today. His name's Karl, and I actually met him on Reddit. What's up, man?
Hey, man. How you doing?
So I met Karl on a subreddit. Well, I don't know. So some context of Reddit. Reddit's culture is not the most nuanced or open to new ideas or open to discussion because it's an online forum where people can be anonymous. But I found this subreddit called, I guess, Let's Talk Music. Is that what it's called? Yeah, and basically it's mostly people that have fairly reasoned discussion and actually often know what they're talking about. And it's not a super popular subreddit, and it's kind of like a bit of a divergence from the typical culture of online discourse. And that's kind of where I met this guy, and I saw some posts that he made. I was like, man, I just want to like listen to you talk for a while. So
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yeah.
But you were saying earlier, like right before we started recording, about like some different subreddits that kind of have a similar culture in their niche.
Yeah, I think that they're like I don't know. I don't know what it is specifically, but I feel like there's like a max capacity where like beyond a certain number of subscribers or posters, discussion stops happening, and you like, right. And I don't know if it's a size thing or a moderator's thing, but a lot of other music forums, particularly on Reddit, just descend into like big populism, and actual discussion gets cut out because people are like, oh, I don't want to read a essay, you know? And like, you know, to be fair, like sometimes I post pretty long things and like, nobody's going to read this. But I feel
like I'd say concise. They're long, but they're concise, if that makes any sense. Like it's not.
Yeah. Right. And it's, you know, yeah, thank you. Yeah. 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 You know, and like my background is, I know how to play saxophone, but I wouldn't really call myself a musician, right? But I, you know, grew up in a household that both of my parents listened to like far out stuff my whole life. And then even now, in my late 20s, my parents and I trade off recommendations all the time. And, you know, I live in Chicago, and every year I go to Pitchfork with my dad because, you know, it's like, cool. Yeah, it's like a thing to do with him, you know? So I've always kind of been around music discussion as much as any of us aren't really musicians, if that makes sense. So,
yeah, that's interesting because like most people, at least in my experience, like they're mainly introduced to music as like a personal thing in their teenage years. And there's usually a huge disconnect from their family or any real adult, let's just be real, about like,
oh yeah,
they like it because it makes them feel good, or it's popular, or some combination of reasons like that, and they don't even know that there's deeper, like there's protein instead of just sugar, you know. And
oh yeah,
so you kind of were born into and lived in a situation where you were able to have like, all right, well, this may be good, I just don't like it, or there's other things like you were able to appreciate things that you wouldn't be able to because you in a way.
Yeah, and I feel like I don't know. There's definitely like early memories, I think, for me, like when I was like maybe 13, my parents took me to see Andrew Bird. And I just like hated it. I was like, why am I here?
13-year-old.
Like, I was like, this is just some bullshit. Like, you know, and it was like definitely some stuff like that. And then it's like now, I don't know, then it was like a couple years later into high school, I was like, oh man, I really like Andrew Bird. And it was like, and it started clicking, right? And so I definitely like had a little bit of that, but like, I don't know, listening to like Perubu, which was like a far off offshoot into punk, you know, at the same time as, you know, my folks liked Beck and the Beastie Boys, was like a lot of like contemporary stuff met old stuff. And I feel like so many people have that experience of like, oh, well, my dad listens, like if you're lucky, I feel like your dad listens to Led Zeppelin, right? Yeah. Or like The Doors. And like, it's not to knock that, but I think that there's like been a lot of think pieces lately about how much people's tastes firm up, and how much they like listen for nostalgia and, you know, right. And I feel like that's true of a lot of people. And like, you can see it now. I mean, like, even if you're right, you can talk to like a 30-year-old and like, probably pretty predictably understand like what hits they'll know. Right. And it's not to say that I don't know those hits. I mean, like all the weird R. Kelly shit has really taught me how much R. Kelly I know. Right.
I mean, it's interesting you say that because like I live in North Carolina and
Mm,
pop punk has become super popular, but not like pop punk bands necessarily,
mm.
but we have punk DJs here, and they'll just have like,
Oh
and they'll
wow.
sell out like every night and have things, and it's just like they just play pop punk all night long, and it's just like
Yeah.
a nostalgia fest basically, which
Yeah. Oh yeah.
it's just an interesting thing to see. Like,
Yeah. Well, and I feel like that's a really interesting sort of contemporary version, right? Because like, I mean, you see cover bands all the time. I mean, there's like a popular all ladies cover band of Led Zeppelin that calls themselves Les Zeppelin here,
oh yeah,
and like
yeah,
I think there's a group here, Rod Rod Gang and the Tough Curls or something, and he just does like purely like dad rock covers, and they're good, and they like dance around on short shorts, and it's a fun show.
yeah.
Uh, it's just like not necessarily, I don't know, pushing an agenda in music.
It's I actually this is my problem with Spotify. I'm gonna loop this in here.
Mm,
Is that I don't have a problem as a platform, like as from the sense of a product and how well it's programmed. It's fantastic. It's the best that's ever existed, the best. But the community of Spotify, and maybe this is related to what you're saying before. If I want to find like a playlist, let's say I wanted to feel a certain emotion. Let's say like I wanted to feel like forlorn. If I searched
mm.
forlorn on Spotify playlist, if I search any word, it may literally any word, the first 40-ish playlists almost overwhelmingly will be all Billboard hits,
Oh
almost
yeah.
exclusively. And maybe that's just maybe because I grew up on like not even like Yahoo Music and like these like in Last
Mm,
FM a little bit more like they weren't very smart algorithms, but like it
yeah.
exposed me to a lot of things that weren't super popular. I mean, they were still signed, they were still had some level of success, but like
Mhm.
it was very easy to find content and curators, I guess is the word, that give you content. They're like, oh, you like this? You're like, okay, well then you enjoy this, and that's kind of mostly what most of the playlists and content were based out of. I feel like most every playlist I find now on Spotify is not that way. Again, that's not the
Oh
platform's fault.
yeah.
That's but it's this weird thing where I'm like, I'm bored with this. I want to hear a new sound, or at least
Hmm.
a band with the same sound, And I find that kind of like discouraging to the point where I'm like, I mean, you can find these things otherwhere, so I go find Spotify playlists outside of Spotify. But
Mm.
even then, just like that curated, like the respect for a curator, it seems kind of low on in the music. While we like an Instagram influencer, which is basically a curator of Instagram content, it's the same mentality that skyrocketed. But like I feel like
Oh
the
yeah.
curators of music are kind of lazy.
And I think it's I don't know, I feel like it's something that has been, I think it depends. Like recently I was reading, The Guardian had an interesting piece about it was like a 10-year retrospective on Spotify. And I think that the common adage has always been like, oh, well, Spotify like can't do anything other than increase your listening and the breadth and depth of what you listen to. And it's like now 10 years on, people are looking at it and it's like, actually, it looks like algorithmically it's closing and narrowing your tastes, right? And it focuses your tastes and like it gets you into a loop. And I feel like there's ways to exploit it, right? Like I think looking through like related artists is a way, and right, but it takes like an active effort in the same way that like I think I remember like early days for Pandora, there was a function. I haven't used it in like years, but like there was definitely a function where you could add in tracks to a playlist, so you could have like a Fugees playlist and then toss in something completely unrelated, right? And then it would like try to balance that out, and you would get something that was like kind of like Fugees radio, but like not quite.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like there have been ways around it, but generally speaking, yeah, I feel like just due to the nature of it, right? It does narrow taste, and also like we're seeing really weird things happen music industry wise now in reaction to like Spotify, like Drake's like 110-minute long album or whatever, where like there's like four bangers and like 20 songs that just suck, you know. But it's because like streaming wise, people are like, if the bangers are spaced out by enough like competent filler, that album's going to get a bunch of streams off of having, I don't know how many it actually, I think it has like 22 tracks or whatever, the recent one, but it'll get a bunch more streams off of 22 tracks, and like a lengthy time based on how like streams calculate into sales for ratings. Right. And you see that, I think, more and more with like popular artists, is like we're getting longer albums. As much as people like don't listen to albums, we're getting longer albums on the off chance that like somebody will stream the whole album, right? And I think that where the album is as a format is in an interesting place, because of things, some things like that, but
yeah, and like as an artist, like the way your portal into Spotify from an artist perspective, it's interesting to see how the mechanics of, you can kind of see what their intentions are by the tools they give you, and mostly the tools they don't give you. And it's like they heavily emphasize new music. They're like, we'd rather you release 4 singles off this 10-track album. That's what we want to do. They're like, and like they don't really care if you have an album dropping. They care if you have a single dropping. That's really how. I mean, obviously that's sort of been the trend of things always, but I think it's only a greater thing. And so I'm incentivized to like finish. If I'm going to write a whole album, I'm like, I'm going to finish this one track first and then finish the rest with the album, so I can space this out, every month release a new one. Because like their release radar, like it's designed, you can only put music that has never been released anywhere on there, even for
and that's absolutely, and that's an interesting. I haven't thought about that as hard. That's interesting.
And because like most singles is the album drops and then you hear the single, and then you hear the second single. It's the album's already been released. Like you could have bought the CD, the Ed Sheeran CD, and listened to it. Castle on the Hill technically came out the same time as whatever else was on there, but like that's not how Spotify, like they literally said you cannot have released this music anywhere else, especially on Spotify.
Oh sure. Well, and that's like, it's making me think, last year, Tierra Whack did her album. I don't know if you caught it, but it was a unique one in the rap landscape, because it was 15 minutes long and 15 tracks. So it was all on the concept that like each track could be a minute.
That's some punk mess right there.
Oh yeah, right. Well, and it's like it was kind of undone, especially in like the kind of like weird era we're in now, where like Migos and Drake and people are releasing super long albums. And so she just had, and it's like tight, and like every song conceptually lands and is distinct from what preceded it, right? And it's a really interesting project, and like it was enough that like Earl Sweatshirt has been running after the drop of I Don't Do Shit, I Don't Go Outside. He now broadcasts with Red Bull Radio, and does what it's called Stay Inside with Earl Sweatshirt. And he was on there, and he was like, Tierra Whack's project has like inspired me to like do shorter tracks, because like conceptually it can be done, right? And then it's interesting, you're making me think of that, because now this year I think she's released 7 singles, all evenly spaced apart, and there's been no mention of an album.
Yeah. But
it's like she's like surviving off of singles now in an interesting way, right? And I wonder how much of that has to do with it pinging, like she's always on that forefront of people's mind for like new, right?
And that's the world we live in. Like you take it from a non-musical, like Instagram, you want to be heard just like, this is too much, this is annoying, you want to be heard this much. So you're always on people's, like, you just use their instant gratification like over and over and abuse it. And SoundCloud, the mentality of people who make their careers on SoundCloud is just, you release shit all the time. Like it's just constantly, they're not singles, because it's SoundCloud's like a glorified media player that you can upload to, and it doesn't have the infrastructure of Spotify. But like, maybe that's just the model that like we like artists need to embrace. And like, why are we so reluctant? I mean, the snobby answer is like, I want to create an album, so I'm like, dude, you don't have a concept album, you don't have a theme album. You're really not gaining anything from this. Like you're just using this medium to like do any. You're just a collection of songs that in the same genre and are mastered at the same like level. That's
Oh,
what
sure.
almost all albums is, and that's not a problem. But it doesn't use. It's effectively a collection of singles.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna do an album, in the sense, like Periphery released an album, and they're like, hey, this is the common thing. We're trying to tell a story through this. Like that, then I think you should use that. But like, is there any other like real justified reluctance on artists avoiding doing the single model?
I think of it kind of, so it's like now what I'm doing is I'm a photographer, right? And particularly actually, like a non-commercial photographer. So I'm just like, I've spent the past year, nailing down, multiple year series that I've been invested in. And it's been weird and like hyper unprofitable. And, I've been able to do it because I've been lucky in a number of ways, but like none of it's really made me any money, yet, maybe one day, but it's like doing it, for the sake of like, I guess, experimentation, right? In that same vein that I feel like some bands, right, will make something that maybe won't be commercially successful, but they feel as though there's like a necessary, place for it to exist in the world. And I think of it because I work so heavily in series. What's up?
Like art for art's sake exclusively.
Yeah, well, and because I think sometimes, art for art's sake has something to say about the world, right? Whether that's about the world or about music or about photography as a medium, right? And I feel like it's not necessarily like, I feel like sometimes art for art's sake, or like sometimes experimental music, to bring it back to like the topic, can be seen as something that's like really like masturbatory, right? Like a lot of like Swans' early work is like experimental by way of being like never heard before, but like, did we need to hear it? Right.
Yeah.
Versus like their recent stuff, I feel like they came back, in the late 90s, and then like all the releases now, like, The Seer and To Be Kind, are albums that came back with a purpose, right? And like they're experimental and weird, but like it's as he said in an interview, that everything, it's all, the purpose of it all is for ecstasy, right? And that they commonly, Swans gets seen as a band that's about being like sad. But then he's like, no, but it's not about like being sad. It's about like finding ecstasy through like obliteration, right? Which is like you like, right? And like, I feel like, unfortunately, maybe without like 20 to 30 years of noodling around for them, they wouldn't have gotten there.
Yeah.
And like, right. And so it's interesting. That's interesting, but I feel like part of the strength of what an album can do for you, because I work heavily in series, and part of what disturbs me about Instagram as an artist is like, Instagram doesn't let you preface the contexts in which people will view your art, right? So like,
I call that framing, in the sense of like, you have
yeah, oh yeah,
like, because like to me, visual art just doesn't trip my trigger. But if like, let that artist talk to me for 2 minutes before and explain this to me, and I would probably love that piece of art. Because it give me this like multimedia, not multimedia, but multi-medium context to that art. And it's like, oh, this is way cooler than I thought it was. It's more than just sounds in an MP3, or more than just like strokes of a brush.
Yeah, right. And I think that too. It's like, adjacency matters, right? Like if I'm scrolling through Instagram and I see like, I don't know, a selfie, and I'm like, cool, a selfie, and like your brain is kind of off, and then you see like an ad for Nike, and you're like, oh, here's this Nike ad, and then you see like, a really great photo. Contextually, you might not think, oh, that's a really great photo, right? And I struggle to think of like a great analogy that goes for an album that did this. But I think that like sometimes what an album can do is it can give your songs the context in which they can be, right, in which they can be, fully heard, versus sort of like the necessary appeal of a single, right? Because I feel like what a single has to do is it has to perform at a very specific level, right? It has to have like that engagement within 10 seconds, right? And that sort of precludes the ability of a single, to communicate other things, like it just has a limited range, which can be good and can be an interesting constraint artistically, right? And like can be played with all the time. I think I think like LCD Sound System did an interesting job playing with the idea of like what a single is, because like all of their like technical singles are like 6 minutes long.
Yeah.
And I think you see a lot of people, if you look a little bit before our time, maybe like a decade, like in the 80s, you can see a lot of bands struggling with what is radio friendly, right? Because it was a much more rigorous and demanding format that had different constraints in a lot of places, right? And so like Sleep as a band, right, is like legendary for having like an album that's like one song long. Like they were like the first band that was ever like, man, we're gonna make like an album and it's gonna be like one whole song, and it was like a super extended, super long song that they would play live and people would be like, oh my God. And then they would want it to be, they're like, oh, I really want this album of this great song I heard that was like transformative stoner rock. But then it was never really released for like forever until like I think just recently, sometime in the past decade. And it's because every studio that would pick them up would be like, oh, well, I can't chop this. They're like, oh, do you mind if I take this 60-minute long track and cut it down to 3 minutes for radio? And Sleep was like, no, that's like not the thing, and so it didn't have like a commercial viability. It didn't have single ability. In that way. And I feel like Sleep kind of played with that format of like, what's the length of a song? And I think we saw some more of that before kind of this streaming era, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So I guess like that's a very long answer.
That's what I was looking for.
But like, but in terms of like, what does an album have to offer? I think it provides controlled context through which to hear things. Such that I think that like a lot of like Daft Punk would be boring were it not for its surroundings.
It's context, yeah.
Yeah,
that's like you listen to like a Tool album, you're like, if you just skipped it, you're like, all right, this is some weird noises for like 5 minutes. And then weird noises 5 minutes. It's meant to like deactivate you, I think, in a weird way. So like it calms you down. And then when they get to like a proper song after, you're like hyper attuned and really sensitive to like, wow, there's like a lot going on. You can actually hear a lot more nuance but if you just listen to all their like, songs in a row, your brain kind of like turns it down a little bit. Your ears.
Yeah.
But do most albums actually use the context? I would say probably no.
Oh yeah, no, right, and like arguably to do that, I mean, arguably like that's your concept, right? Like it might not be right, and like that's like a big argument I have all the time is that like that's like a concept as much as like a rap album that tells like a narrative across 40 minutes, across 80 minutes, right? Like that's like the concept is like a musical one, right? It's communication through instrumentation and patterning, right? Yeah. Tool's an interesting example of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So the question is not like, should you as an artist write an album? Is that it's just a tool. It's just one format that you don't have to choose. You should not do it. For like the disposable, like rapid fire nature of like trap from a production standpoint is really easy. Like it's easy. I don't mean that in a chastising way. It's just easy to make. Like it's like, it's all hinged around these vocals. But the backing track is like it's super formulaic. It's really barely polyphonic. Like and that's not a problem. And with that, giving a lot of context to focus on it would probably not suit you. And by the time you would have to spend to build the context, your thing's probably not even relevant anymore. And so
and there's
be a bad idea.
Yeah, and I think that there's like plenty of cases in which there's like I don't know, like I really want to like a lot of what's his name, Gucci Mane's work. But like every time I listen to an album, it's horrible. It's just like, God, can I get through it? But he has like these like shining gems, right? And like, should he be right? Should his formula have to produce 20 duds to produce 2 good songs, right? And like, I think there's a case for like the pressure to produce new stuff and relevancy, like he could release an album that's just 20 good songs, but I think that's not where we're at right now. Right. And I think that,
and I don't think it would be appreciated for what it is. So, like, for his
that's maybe true too.
Yeah, and so I mean, as a like, oh, this album's great. I think this is really great. I'm going to share it with my 2 Facebook friends who actually care. And as opposed to if he really spaced those out over like 2 years, he would get his goals met better. So he's incentivized to not have the best album.
And that's probably true, right? That's I think that's probably true.
I was talking to a local artist. He's like, as far as physical media, like, I mean, people still sell CDs and like, whatever piece of merch, but like not a whole lot. Like, you don't put a whole lot of effort to it because like people don't buy CDs much anymore.
Oh, sure.
And he said he started printing his stuff on vinyl, and like as a local artist, I was like, dude, isn't that like really expensive? He's like, yeah. I was like, but he's like, I want to be able to last beyond like this. I was like, dude, I don't think I've written anything that is warranting lasting that long.
Yeah.
And that's not that I'm like shitting on my own work. I don't get to pick if it gets to last. If the market decides that, like, dude, you wrote something that's a little transcendent, I'm like, I will put that bitch on some vinyl. And I think there's like a bit of healthy humility in the sound, knowing that you're not going to do something better than the Beatles. Like, it's not going to happen. Don't even try to beat that game because you're gonna.
Yeah, but like, loads of people have done things better than the Beatles. Come on.
Well, I mean,
fuck the Beatles.
Like, you're not going to hit a white album status if that's what you're trying to do. And you should.
Yeah. And I think,
just like, I know that they're transcendent in that sense. They're a transcendent band. So.
Oh yeah. And I think, what's his name? Father John Misty has a great song about that, right? I think off of Pure Comedy. I'll never remember the song name, but it's essentially like a discussion. The song itself is a discussion of like the useless things that we use petroleum for, and then he gets self-deprecating and is like, and this bullshit will be pressed into a vinyl that will exist like well after humanity rots into the fucking earth because of our petroleum use, and like right, and like he's like calling into question the validity of the permanence of vinyl and other things, right? And I don't know, there's something there. And Chuck Klosterman, I don't know if you've run across him. He's an author. I don't know. I think he has a mixed reputation amongst a lot of people, but he's one of the growing class of people who are like pop culture philosophers, where he develops sort of pop culture theory, right? Among others, like Mark Grief is a great essayist that does a lot of contemporary essays. He wrote a really great breakdown sort of like the theory behind Radiohead, right? Like if there's like a pop music theory, and he like developed his music theory about like Radiohead as like a indication of the times and sort of like, how we relate to technology and disembodiment and meaning. And it was really interesting. It's a great breakdown. But anyway, Chuck Klosterman wrote a book, 2013, I think, called "But What If We're Wrong?" And it's about how we remember music and culture, and how much we think now, like, oh well, in 50 years, everybody is going to remember System of a Down because Toxicity is a banger, right? And like, it's a great album, and I and I don't know. In some ways, I wish Toxicity would last 50 more years. But then he talks about sort of the factors that go into like what I think his classic byline is that Philip Sousa is like synonymous with marching band music. Like Sousa was the director who like made so many marching band anthems. Like American march music is like, his name is the same thing, right? And he's like, so like, what if we get far out enough from like classical music that we, right, like that there's just a handful of names, and who will those names be? Like, who will get carried on, right? And he's like, and he thinks like maybe like Chuck Berry, maybe like Bob Dylan, and he's got a couple interesting theories about it. But basically, he says that like we just don't know. And like, for instance, like one of his prime examples is that The Matrix is very easily read into as sort of like a 2000s like coming to terms with technology and artifice. But it gets recontextualized off of the fact that the producers, they're twins. They were twin brothers when they made The Matrix, and now they're twin sisters because they transitioned. And so, like, is The Matrix really, like, historically, will it be seen as a film that's about, like, being trapped in the matrix of your identity, right? And like,
and as an artist, like, that's like, I hate that term. As an artist, you know, but just looking at it from the vein of artists, a lot of people they kind of create. They have a bunch of cultural context that they don't think about, because that's we don't think about. That's just our inherent bias when we see things, and they kind of write things without the expectation that people are going to recontextualize it without the bias they wrote it with, and with a new bias that new listener has. And so watching, I watched Fight Club again recently, and seeing it, it's super like pre-millennial struggle against like the White House, like overly conservative, constrictive nature of like, this is what we thought would make us happy, and then you're like, it's not working. But it still works really well now, but not it doesn't. I don't see it through a 90s light anymore. I see it through swap out IKEA with Instagram, and it's like a different movie, but it's the same. But it's a new experience almost in context of something else. And so I would think for music or any like culture art to be transcendent, it has to be able to be recontextualized in its new culture, I would say.
And that's like he talks about Moby Dick becoming valid well after what's his face's death, because Moby Dick was written, and he was like, this will be my opus, and everyone will love this book. It'll be the greatest novel, you know. And then he like died, and in part died earlier because he like sank into alcoholism because Moby Dick just didn't sell. Like, it just tanked, right? And he was like, well, here was like the shining beacon of my hope, and everybody fucking hated it, so I'm just gonna drink, right? And that's like what he sank into. But then like it was like after World War II, Moby Dick, suddenly a lot of Navy men came back, a lot of people who had relational experience, and Moby Dick took off. Right, it like took off after I think World War II, and it was just like, and then it like became a great American classic, you know, and like its context and its cultural meaning was like provided later, right? He postulates that like 9/11 will have a lot more to do with how we see things in 100 years on, like how we look at now. We'll contextualize a lot of our art around pre and post 9/11, and like Fight Club is an interesting example because at the end of that movie, right, they totally like blow the fuck up out of that building, and then like thinking about that now, it's like kind of like, would we show that in a major movie, right? Like that movie made bank in theaters, and like,
but and seeing that thing now of like most artists, like most filmmakers, would probably actively choose not to do it that way, and having it be created in a separate bubble allows it to be like far more authentic and not intentionally controversial, but like it's like, this is the story I need to tell, and so it allows you to politically correct, almost the word I want, but like violate some social norms just for the sake of your message, because you don't know what the rules are in the future. Social are.
Yeah, you know, and it's I mean, and it's I think it's definitely right. So you said that, like, you have experience with SoundCloud.
Yeah.
Is your that's right, and that's like a really interesting one, right? Because it's so swappy and anonymous, and I don't know. It's
sloppy is the good word, but like it's a bit the Wild West on there, and the way people see it is like it's just different. Like the platform helps you a little bit, but I would say almost like take SoundCloud I would go with Reddit as Spotify is to Instagram. Like in the sense of your interaction on Instagram is extremely limited, and your ability to actually express yourself on Instagram is extremely limited. You can just do it this way or this way. It's like the Apple mentality. Like, we're gonna have very little functionality. It's just gonna be perfect. And so the functionality is here. It's gonna be amazingly easy to use, very convenient, and you're gonna like, even if you don't want to do it this way, you're gonna do it this way because it's so damn easy.
Yeah.
And I mean, as opposed to like I'll go with maybe like nine gag or something, maybe. But the sense of like, there's a platform there, and you kind of know how it works. The devs don't exactly know how it works, and it just kind of it develops its own like ecosystem based on things that it's easy or hard to do on there.
Yeah, and I think part of that has to do with like what the I think part of that definitely has to do with what the commercial mechanisms are too, right? Like
Sure.
SoundCloud doesn't have a lot of incentive to help you or to really produce like singular, you know, titular works that are like oh, well, this is our opus. You know, and they don't have like that sort of we need the views to subsist on, like, because SoundCloud somehow exists by like force of will, which is kind of cool. Like
minus like the record companies, like it doesn't have a corporate machine as like
right.
It doesn't need, because Spotify has to spend a shit ton of money to maintain these they are very vulnerable in a sense to these record companies.
Yeah,
if they all decided to pull, or most of them decided to pull, they would be done.
Yeah. Well, and I think, I think there's sort of a weird, like, dream of the internet thing surfacing in SoundCloud, like in like the old sense that like we've all sort of forgotten in a post Facebook era, but like, I mean, like how does Craigslist make money, right? Like off of like occasionally, I think in like New York and like San Francisco, they charge money for to post rent, like seeking renters ads.
Like, if you post like a job listing, it's like $5 or something.
Yeah, right. And only in some cities, and otherwise it just basically just like exists.
It's
right?
a white Times New Roman website.
Oh yeah, right. And like, I mean, similarly, like Wikipedia, I mean, they do giant donation pledge drives, but like Wikipedia just sort of like exists without like a financial incentive to do so. And I think that interesting stuff comes out of that, right? I think that like, I don't know, in some sense, right? Like only SoundCloud could have given birth to Little B.
Yeah.
Right. And like, I don't know, I think an interesting medium in between all those two is like the role of like Bandcamp, right? Because Bandcamp hosts like a huge variety of things, and like on the idea of like what is an album, I mean, like Kool-Aid of Das Racist fame, he released like 3 albums 2 years ago that were 100 songs long. And he was just like, yeah, it's just gonna be 100 songs, you know. And he released like, I think, more than a track a day technically, if you that year. Wow. Through Bandcamp, and they're all like for sale, and God knows who buys them, but
from a production standpoint, so when you upload your song to SoundCloud, however loud it sounds, I mean, you could just completely broken every rule of audio production, and however loud it is to a point, as long as it's not clipping, that's how loud it's going to be played back. And so if you master really loud, it'll be really loud. If you master really quiet, it'll be quiet. Spotify's like, no, we demand you actually know what you're doing. So if you cheat and you just compress the hell out of that song, Spotify will detect that. They run a lot of analyzation.
Oh wow!
Which is why if you listen to the Black Album on Spotify, and the next track you listen to Death Magnetic, like if you just listen to the actual MP3s of them, it's just like quiet blasting your face. That's not the same. And it's brilliant technology, but again, that precludes you either have to spend 1,000 hours learning how to do this yourself and screwing up a million times, pay a real studio, or you're not going to be able to compete on this. So by that little where SoundCloud is far more tolerant of shitty production and Trap, by its, I think, completely coincidental nature, is very tolerant of bad production, because
yeah, that's true.
It's not very mid-range heavy. So like compressed mid-range, like that stabs a human in the ear. Like you take a like a Megadeth album and then like compress it really hard and turn it up. You're like, this is. But if you take a Trap, it's like mostly bass and like and percussive. It has like highs and mids, but they're mostly percussive. And I think that's just like a coincidental thing that scene gravitates to it. I mean, just like all these things collided at the same time.
Yeah. And do you feel like I don't know, because as a non-producer or musician, is like, do you feel like there's room for community on SoundCloud? Do you feel like there's connection between?
I'm definitely a lurker on SoundCloud in the sense
Yeah.
of like
Okay.
I'm trying to figure out the culture in the sense of like, and I haven't yet. It's more I'm just watching, you know.
Oh sure. Oh
So
sure.
I mean, it seems to be, but people would say there's community on Reddit. I was like, communication's not community. So like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think the platform incentivizes community in any way at all.
Okay. Because
Like,
that's been because it's like it's been on my mind a lot in the past 2 years or so. Is like looking around and seeing who is right. It started really when Overwatch dropped. And Overwatch came out, and I was like, oh well, it's a Blizzard game, so they'll have some mechanism of organizing community, right? Because that was when like the best maybe thing about World of Warcraft was always that you could have extensive guilds and you could like get people together and you could you could like meet the same people and gain
through the community kind of thing.
right. And like really realistically, like what kept me around for years after I like stopped enjoying WoW was people that I enjoyed. And like Overwatch though just completely like drops that for this idea that if we match you up in as many matches as quickly as possible and we have like high turnover on matches, then you'll be like engaged in the game. And I think it like traps you in that like that loop, and that they like they'd have very low incentive to want you to be better, because like if you get trapped in this like loop of like almost 50% win loss, you won't like climb anywhere, but you'll like you'll get trapped in that like that neuro trigger loop of like, oh well, I know I'm close. And I feel like community there would almost break the sort of like addictive thing of it, right? And I feel like for me it's like community, and then it's like once I didn't see it there, I was like, oh well, it's like they don't really do a great job of curating that on like Spotify, because like
they avoid it. There's no communication at all, like nothing.
Right, like you can like kind of, I guess you can like see your friends' accounts and you can see like their playlists.
Yeah, it's this, but again, like it's like I was saying, that the very specific, perfectly designed channels of communication.
Yeah.
Like, you can't make it your own. This is what you can do, and if you don't want to do that, then you're gonna do nothing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, and it's like I think Bandcamp always sort of had like an intention to like publicize a little bit, to like not necessarily be a record label, but to be a hype man. And now they do this really, really great job of mining their own. They mine their own platform for like really great articles. So every month they have like a best of emerging punk, best of emerging trap. Right? They have all these categories. I think there's 5 of them: trap, punk, metal, and like 2 others, and they all get like a roundup of like 10 artists every month, right? And they do, right? I was reading one this morning that was like seven gems from world music or whatever, right? And they're always trying to like generate discussion around the music, which I find is like a step in the right direction.
I did. Is there like a message board or a commenting system, or like is there like a way to interact with it?
I think they have a commenting system. I would love to see a message board. I would love to see that. They now, if you buy an album, you have the option to like review the album, and so any sense of reviewing on Bandcamp is displayed on the artist's page by everybody who's bought it. So it shows you how many people have supported the album as a number, and then it tells you like the top like 3 comments that people have left or whatever. And so you can see a bit of like actual community feedback. I think on the assumption that if the album has acclaim, then you'll be reading professional reviews elsewhere. But it sort of like highlights a little bit of like this, like people are actually interacting with the music concept.
Yeah, because like
outside of raw views.
Yeah, Bandcamp's kind of always tried to attract the more connoisseur kind of person. So like, I don't want a professional review because I know your PR agent talked to this person and you had them all set up. And if they didn't, I think they did, which is all that matters, you know?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I want my
That's true.
Amazon reviews to have like missing words and like they misspelled stuff. Like I'm like, yeah, this guy's real. You know, some like horrible iPhone 4 photo of the mouse they just bought or whatever. You know.
Oh, sure, right? Yeah.
Guy.
Yeah. What comes across as authentic, right? Yeah. It's funny.
Speaking of community, and how like the platforms intentionally restrict or allow things is YouTube, because YouTube from a content creator, there's very little discourse from the creator to the consumer, but the consumers have their own community in the sense that they will talk about that. Like,
yeah.
But the way that I think YouTube did a great job of doing this, if you stay up top, which the page stays up top, it'll autoplay and it'll allow you to have that like Overwatch next, zero. And every device you see this, you will not see comments unless you want to, and it will go to the next video immediately, and that's what it defaults to, which is probably But as soon as you scroll down, autoplay stops. And so to have interaction.
That's true. Yeah.
Like it's they do a good job of not having too many notifications, but enough notifications so you can have discourse and message board-ish style conversation with that. And on top of that, YouTube also allows creators to make like text or picture, like non-video posts.
Yeah, and you can see that. Yeah.
There's not too many of them because I'm not here for that. I just want to see them once a week, or something,
Yeah.
But it's still, I think they've done a fantastic job of kind of trying to juggle all these different incentives and appeal to different without alienating either one. Because it's too much for the average listener. Spotify is like, I'm like, I just feel stifled. I'm like, this is not my place. Like, there's no sense of community. And to kind of have both of those at the same time, like Warcraft, for instance, like it's too much. Like, I just want to go mine some iron, like.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, and it's and I think that I'm, and so on the topic that you brought up a little bit before in terms of like trying to find people that will recommend things or talk about things, right? Is like for a while I've been listening to different DJs, not in the sense of like electronic music DJs, but like radio DJs.
Sure.
And I found a number of them that are really good, and I find that like some of like the legends like John Peel, right? Like you can sort of begin to understand his taste and trust his taste when he recommends something new to you, which is like a really interesting dynamic versus sort of the algorithms idea. But then there's a number of like, and I hate the term, but for lack of a better one, there's a number of like tastemaker channels on YouTube now that exist.
YouTube's pretty like, YouTube is the least from me, man. It's just me. I spend the most time there, so maybe that's part of it. But like, YouTube knows what I want better than I do often.
Oh
like,
yeah.
Spotify doesn't have a clue. Like this is just bad, man. Come on, it's like from like 10 years ago. Like, YouTube's like, it's the best digital curator for me, at least. Like,
and I think my only thing is that they're. I think for me now with YouTube, in terms of just trusting YouTube's recommendations, is that they tend to like trend towards what I was most recently interested in, right?
Yeah.
So if I go on a departure and like my girlfriend's been really into like a lot of like 80s, not actually 80s, but like millennial bands that use 80s synth sort of stuff. And so I've been like listening to like Walk the Moon and a bunch of stuff lately that like isn't normally in my listening range, but I'm trying to like figure out what the appeal is.
Recommendations are corrupted for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, and then my recommendations are like all everywhere, and I'm like, how do I know I listen to like 20, like it makes me look like I'm a fan because I listen to like their whole album, right? And that they're like so looking for that, but I think that YouTube, like for some smaller artists too, like if you're into like punk at all, like there's a number of like guys that curate channels that are just punk mixtapes, and they're like, oh yeah, here's this thing, they gave me the okay on this, here's this 20-minute EP for this band, and there's interesting stuff like that's cropping up.
And I guess this is a DJ / curator, but you have, and this, I find this is only electronica and only in certain specific like subsets of like synthwave, like that kind of vibe, like purple synthy music. Like there's it. If you want to listen to synthwave, you type in synthwave mix, and you'll have 3-hour track of good shit. And there's 1,000 videos of that, and that's kind of, and to the point where that community releases their music basically. Like, okay, you can go listen to my channel if you're into it, and they just send it to the curator.
Yeah.
You know, and it's that's just the community knows that's how it works, and that's how people listen to it. And it's like almost you go to the DJ first, which I honestly I prefer. I don't think it'll necessarily like that genre is new enough, and there's not enough pretension in it because it's new. Like as opposed to like, oh, this is a metal channel. But like, what kind of metal? You know, like expectation and pretentiousness is not the right word, but like pickiness. You know, and like
there's
same thing. You know.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about who he was. There was a guy that just got put on DJ Stingray just did a giant mix through Boiler Room. And it's like a 2-hour long set or whatever. And he's like an actual DJ, not like a curator. But he did a mix of like a ton of great stuff, and it's all like super danceable. I don't know necessarily what you'd say. I guess it's house. I guess it's a house mix. Yeah, and he did that, and then like they immediately posted every track in order for all 2 hours, and I was like, that's huge. Like, right. And I think that some of it has to do with like that accountability of being able to find what they were playing, right? And like those things, because like I don't know, I've listened to mixes that have been great, and then it's like you can't figure out what you heard, and you're like, well, if I liked that one thing, right? Just in terms of exposing you to artists, right? I think it's important that you're still represented, despite, right, if you belong to like a semi-anonymous genre. You know, if you're a dream pop artist.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like a level of humility in knowing your place. Like, and I think that electronic music has never hit the top 40. It's never ruled, at least in America, like popular mindset. Like, I mean, you have a couple of songs, like, you know, like I was watching a documentary about Blue, like Blue Da Be Da Die. Like that song got big. Like Sandstorm, you know, I mean,
Sandstorm's a banger.
Skrillex, they probably couldn't name a Skrillex song, but Skrillex.
Sure.
I'm saying like when you create electronic music, you're not going into it expecting as much stardom from an individual song. But if you go into it like more traditional music, like, oh, Led Zeppelin, okay, I can make guitar music. I can write a song that'll blow. No, you can't. Like, and so there's this almost hubris I think that develops of you think your song is so much better because you are trying to compete in a market where that one song was so much better, as opposed to electronic music. It is a little there's just that culture of like you're trying to get other people to DJ your music was where it was birthed out of, you know?
Oh yeah.
And you're not trying to get other people to cover your song as like a more traditional like music artist. Like in some ways that's offensive, you know? And it's just I think that culture mentality was birthed out of different things.
Yeah, and it's I know. I recall I went to see Galantis for New Year's. It was a cool show. I mean, it was a cool show. Like I enjoyed myself, but it was also like very interesting because like I'm typically seeing, you know, people who are so heavily involved in like, oh, like this is like my niche thing, and like you pay $12 and you go to a show, and it's like wow, my mind was really expanded. And Galantis was very like we scooped out the past like 30 years of danceable tracks from Fatboy Slim and everybody else. And here's all of that. And then like you hear like their 2 songs that they have made, and they're like indistinguishable from this mix. And it was interesting. It was interesting to go, and it made me prompt. I was like talking to my girlfriend about it because again, it was like she was like, oh, we should go. And I was like, what's like their appeal? And she was very much like, oh, it's not necessarily about like these 2 Swedish guys so much as it's about like trust. It was like a trust in that they will provide like the correct atmosphere in which like enjoyment can happen. Right.
But isn't that what you like, I guess and then I'd say, what is your goal as an artist? are you trying to be an entertainer? And what's your priority of goals? Let me rephrase that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are you trying to be an entertainer, or are you trying to get people to listen to this song that you created? Which of those is most important?
Right. Yeah. And like it really begged the question, I think, for the first time for me in a live experience where I was like, weird. Because they had like two big drums behind them that they hit every once in a while for show, you know. It was like very strange, At the same time, I think last year I also saw Drum live, right? Of Broccoli fame.
Mm-hmm.
And Big Baby Dram, he like his show was horrible. It was like he had a DJ and him on a giant stage, and his DJ he didn't even jockey. He just pressed play and pause on tracks, and then all of Dram's vocals had a backtrack that rapped his song for him. So he would just jump in on the hook, and it was like,
was it a good? I mean, to me, like, I don't even care if there's 0 people on stage. If you can entertain me, I don't care how you do it. I don't care how many conventions. Like, but it sounds like he wasn't even entertaining.
Well, and for me, yeah, because for me, like, I don't know, maybe I like wasn't high enough or drunk enough or whatever, but I was isn't this weird? Like, isn't it weird that like he has made like $1 million off of people like loving Broccoli, and like the performance of it kind of sucks. But like everybody was like on that mindset of like, man, we're here and it's summertime and it's outside and we're just having a good time. And like people got it. And like it was a very interesting experience again of like, I mean, it was an entertainment thing, right? Versus like a deep thought about music. And I think that there's room for both, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it's imperative that, like, I watched I looked for live videos of Chainsmokers because I'm like, oh, how did these guys actually live? They're like, it's all DJ sets. I was like, oh, you guys are DJs that made a couple pop tracks that are hella famous now, but like your Chainsmokers show is like, it's like going to Ultra, like
yeah.
And I was like, it's just a different, and honestly I think that's like, there are people who want to see a great mandolin player play mandolin. When you go to a Dream Theater show, you're there. They better hit every single note. Like,
yeah.
But like, if I went to, like, let's say I went to a Korn show. I mean, their stuff's not hard to play, but it's not easy either. Well, drums aren't.
Yeah.
But like everything else, like, would I rather them bum a couple of notes and just go nuts over them play everything perfectly?
Oh, like
and,
10 out of 10.
I'd rather you mess up your notes a little bit to have a better performance. Like, I really would.
Oh yeah.
Like, that's interesting because, like, as a musician, like with a musician, what I've taught, like, that's like just violates every rule. Like,
oh yeah.
Singing off pitch to perform better, you should risk singing off pitch.
Yeah.
They're like,
right. I mean, and I think that's one of the interesting things, right? There's a big, in sort of that weird shadows of classical music thing. There's a big impetus in early education for music of getting it right.
Yeah.
Right. That like getting it right is more important. And like, maybe it's because like getting it right is a more measurable metric, right?
Scientific almost.
It's a more measurable metric than like if you played your trumpet with soul. Oh, your trumpet playing was very soulful, but all wrong.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting. I think, yeah.
I think like local bands, like, and I watch. I like hearing people's reactions because, like, I'm in my own little bias box. I don't know what's going on, but I like to hear, like, and see people's reactions, both like my stuff, but definitely other people's stuff. Like, what makes a crowd interested? And it's almost always like, it doesn't have to. They don't have to great songs. They have to have an energy. They have to have an excitement. They have to make you feel like, of every genre. They have to be like, and it's almost always the charisma of the front end. Almost every single time. Like, every genre, the band was like, oh, they were really good. I was like, musically? Like, or like, and I'll see these bands like, dude, you guys are fantastic. I was just super bored. Like, I mean,
Like, well, and I think that then when you get into outside of like the sort of like, did I accidentally stumble into like a relevant cultural context?
Yeah.
Or in the case of some artists, did you manufacture your music to be relevant, right? Like, I think like we're seeing that now with in a mainstream way. We first saw that with what's his name, Macklemore. right, with like he made like a thrift store was like an anthem about needing to thrift and thrifting being cool, despite like him not having any ties to that. And like coincidentally, I saw him at a festival that summer, and it was like totally weird. He has a song about like Irish pride, and like he's like millionth generation American, and like, you know, but like he inhabits all these things about like pushing forth representation and identity that he like doesn't really have claim to, right? Like I think he has multiple tracks about like, oh, Same Love, right? He has like, and there's Same Love 2, and I think there's Same Love 3, and they're like all tracks about like it being fine to be gay, but like he has no tie to the community, but he like tried to craft like a culturally relevant anthem, right?
And is that okay? I don't like this term, but appropriation.
I think so. I think so, but I think it depends on the community, right? Because like Lady Gaga is another interesting example of that, where like she's always been represented and embraced in gay communities, and like, you know, and like she has somewhat dubious claim, but you know, it's all like there. And I think, I don't know, the appropriation thing is it's an interesting, right? It's like you struggle to be like, is it? But I think that in some sense it is, and I think that that's like. I think it's less about that maybe and more about it being exploitive, right? I think that like Macklemore did it, right? And I think that like that's the edge is like when I was a lot younger and people talked about cultural appropriation, it was like so morally black and white. And like now I think it's about more about like, are you exploiting a community, right? Are you exploiting representation to garner profit? And
but at what point is it just like convention? So like as like a metal band, there's a million rules that you have to follow, or it's not metal anymore. It's not brutal enough.
God bless the metal community, right?
Yeah, we'll go with Bring Me the Horizon. Like they're
sure.
a nice little use case. Everybody's using it all the time now. Like they went from like a deathcore band, like their first album, the 2 albums, to like they're like a minor key like electronic pop band now.
Yeah,
and I think they do both of it pretty well. But like every album they are like about 6 months before, like they're adopting what's trendy like 6 months before it is, and it's not a particular culture, but it's like they're appropriating mainstream culture, you know?
Sure.
Which in some ways is all of us. And is that pandering? Sure, a little bit. Is that a very good financial decision? Absolutely. Can it still be an authentic way for them to express themselves? It may be the best way, because it allows you, like, you're constantly in terms of thinking of it like you're speaking a language. The language of culture is always changing, and if you keep saying the same thing, what you're saying will actually change, because
true.
And so if they're obviously constantly trying to update with how they're talking to adjust with the culture, they can kind of keep saying the same messages, and allows them to be honest. I'm not saying they did that, and I think for you to judge internally when you are doing one or the other, but like I think there's a lot of criticism of people like pandering or trying to find like modify their language to a particular group, when that's in some ways one of the main things you should be considering, you know?
Yeah.
And maybe that the difference there is intention and not technique, but.
And I think it depends too. Are you making work to share your message, to allow your message to be heard, or are you making work that that lends identity and voice to community, right? Because like they aren't necessarily the same, right? Because like Iron and Wine, right? Arguably, Iron and Wine's albums, the early ones at least, we're all like, this is my mess, like this is me. I'm a sad man in a cabin in the woods, like, you know, and like it was great, and like, right? It was a sad man in a cabin in the woods, and it distilled like a very particular emotion, you know, and I don't know, I think he wasn't attempting to be appealing. Unfortunately, it was like the right time and like in indie rock and stuff that like he got co-opted. I could easily see his work today. If he released, you know, his early work today, it would be like nobody would notice it. But
Well, I mean,
Yeah, I don't know.
there's artists like that who their authentic coincidental expression just happened to line up and say something with the current culture, whether he intended to say it or not. But
Mm-hmm.
so in some ways, you don't have a lot of control over that because you're new. You don't really
Yeah.
know what the language is. You're just speaking and hoping it. You think you
Mm-hmm.
know what you're saying, but you don't really know. After that, though, you were like, okay, I kind of see the language you're speaking, and I kind of see where it's going. What do I do now? I can't act. It's almost less authentic because you're not naive anymore.
Well, and I think that and I think that's where he's an interesting case because I think he made those albums and I think he made them because he needed to get that off his chest, and then they really took off, and then he immediately like when he got some traction, he was like, great. I mean, I have big ambitions musically, and then he got like a 20-piece band together, and he like made an album with a 20-piece band because he was like, oh, this is like my music dream though. Like that other stuff was like, I'm a sad man, but this is my music dream, right? And it was like a really interesting shift between like what his musical ambition was versus his use of music to express himself, right?
Like his artistic, at least I'm speaking for him, but like in some ways, his artistic ambition became subject to his musical ambition.
Yeah, right. And that, yeah, and then it's like, and then people were like, we like that sad shit though. And he was like, but that's not where I'm at though. Like I'm just not there.
Yeah.
And right. Um, yeah, and I think right, and I think that called into question some ideas about authenticity. And then his most recent album was actually, I think, a really nice pairing of like the qualities of what was nice. What's up?
Sad man in a cabin with a 20-piece band.
Yeah, right. It was like he found this middle ground between like beautiful vocal and a couple accompanying artists and like not necessarily projecting just sadness, but like an emotional depth. And in like his most recent work that I'll never remember the name of was like a really interesting evolution on that sound. And I don't know. I mean, I think that, but like some artists, like, right, like your example, like some artists like innovate all the time, and like David Bowie, right, like zillions of albums that sound different. Neil Young has distinctive periods, right, where Neil Young is like, now we're fuck all that old stuff, we're doing synths, and you're like, great, you're teaming up with Devo, this is a weird album, and like, I don't know, and I think in some ways that depends on you, and I think that what you were saying earlier about like having an energy and something like that, I think that like really, really matters. And I think that beyond that though, like beyond so right, some bands happen into cultural relevancy, or some single tracks do, right? Like fucking Sandstorm. Like how does what else does Darude do? I think I looked that up actually, and Darude did a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's all like electronic stuff. He's just like, yep, just still doing my thing. He's like, I just wanted to be like, he's one of those guys that like, I watched like a documentary yesterday about the Blue guys. Like, they would probably be doing the exact same thing they're doing now if he would just be like $20 million poorer. Like they would just have a computer. Like they're like, I just do DJ stuff and make beats, and I still hang out with the same dudes in the same place, like.
Yeah, and that, I can admire that. I can admire that for sure. But like other than like, right, you stumble into it because of a relevancy that was out of your control. I think that's a separate case. But like I think that if you are a charismatic artist, you have some sort of charisma, whether that's, big energy or small energy or intimacy, or right, you can project a sort of atmosphere around your production. I think that is only sustaining in the long run if you actually have like another purpose behind it, right? Like I think or at least maybe I would like to think that, but like I think that that's only sustaining in terms of like a popular interest sort of way, that like the lead of David Byrne, right? Like David Byrne is like has that charisma and brought that to Talking Heads, but like his sustaining thing that makes him continually unique is that he's able to bring like a unique insight and an interest to future projects, right? To the point where like when he did his team up with St. Vincent, like I wasn't necessarily musically convinced, but it was compelling. Like it was compelling. I just wasn't like into it, but it was compelling.
I mean, and I think that thing can be just as much just a personality, like a force of personality. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be anything deep or like philosophical or artistic. It can just be like this person's like just like a lot of that like 80s like hair metal singers. They're
Oh
just
yeah.
like D. Snyder or something. That dude is just like he's just a big person. Like he just has
Oh
to be.
yeah.
Like if D. Snyder does an interview, I don't care. I don't even like any of that kind of music necessarily. I'm like, but it's gonna be entertaining because it's probably gonna be good because D. Snyder's there. You know?
Oh yeah. A friend of mine sent me. Um, I can't remember his name, but in like 1953 or whatever was when that very first like just grimy, dirty guitar song came out, Rumble, and it was like the first one of the earliest instances of like recorded like heavy distortion on an electric guitar that was just great, right? And like that song was like banned in like Boston and New York because it was too like provocative, like they thought it would cause bar fights. And then there's a guy that like if you like look up Rumble and you look up his live performances, like there's a guy who's got like all the buttons undone on his shirt and he's like just like lazily like chewing gum and doing like a slow, distorted, just like couple chords on the guitar. And his hair is huge and he's got sunglasses halfway on. And like all the comments in the whole video, even 50 years on, everybody's like, coolest guy ever. Like that's the guy that defined being a man. And then it's like he was like he was like a God-fearing Baptist, I think, right? And like, right, but he like projected this cool. I don't know, and I think that,
Mm.
I think that a lot of people get caught up in making really good music or really adequate music or really compelling music and feel as though because they don't necessarily have like that marketable image that like they won't go anywhere. But I don't know, like I mean like Moby, right? Like Moby's like just a dude,
Yeah.
but like
Skinny as fuck.
Moby's like famous as hell, you know? And I think that Moby didn't like necessarily like, create like a
But
cult of personality to move his stuff.
yeah, I'm trying to think like separated like via genre. Like what is a band in each like main
Mm,
genre that didn't have a figurehead that had success?
yeah.
There's a difference because like I would almost give electronic music a pass because they like it's just they do not a very figureheady like genre. You know,
Yeah,
I mean
but
they kind of have been recently, but
yeah, but like okay, but you have like Dead Mouse created like a shtick,
yeah.
right? You have
There are
Aphex,
there. I'm just
who's
saying
a fucking whack job.
I'm just there's plenty of them that are have figureheads.
Yeah.
I'm just saying there's plenty that don't. And I'm trying to
Yeah, that's
think that
true. That's true.
is there like rock bands that I can think of that had like massive success that didn't have some sort of Nickelback. Actually, I would say Nickelback it in and of itself doesn't. Like
Yeah.
Chad Kroger, is that his name? The
Who?
dude, I mean,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
but I mean, that's being said, everybody could point out that that's the face of Nickelback, even if they don't know his name. Like,
Yeah. Well, and I think that as a particular factor in it too, like record companies want star power. And I think that in part with the way that like trademark and copyright and all that shit is right now, is that like star power combines in with like proprietary sounds, proprietary songs and stuff to create like a necessary figure that way, right? Which is like I think about like growing up, it was in the house a lot, and like now I'm starting to get back into like bluegrass, right? And like a lot of like bluegrass and folk and stuff is like pretty anonymous.
mm,
Like there are definitely like standout guys like Doc Watson and stuff that were like, you know, like, oh, that's like the guy. But like in some sense, he's the guy because he was recorded, right? And
mm,
like a lot of those guys were just never recorded. And there's like all this music though, because it's not necessarily about like your unique innovation. It's about like embodying. It's like about giving breath to this sort of like continually sort of I don't know idea that there's like some human experience embodied in a song about I don't know trying to find a wife that like will always translate and that like you're just the current embodiment of who's translating that song into right? And there's this sort of weird timeless quality and anonymity to folk music that, like, I don't know. I think the electronic music is another one of those ones where you can kind of get away with some anonymity, right? Like I don't know. I could maybe point Skrillex out on the street, maybe. Yeah, right. Yeah, unless he cut that, and then I'd be like, well, I'm not sure, you know.
I mean, take a band like this is as topical is Ghost.
Hmm.
Like, are you familiar with them at all?
Just a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, because like they're very intentionally, even in like interviews and stuff, anonymous, and because they're all private-ish people, is what they say at least.
Mm-hmm.
And but it's almost become their shtick in the sense of like it's almost become more marketing than like, hey, we're doing this to maintain our identities to be authentic. They're like, oh, that's super intriguing. Like now I want to figure out what it is. They're like, all right, we're wrong with that. You know?
No, like anonymity is such a thing like that. I mean, like Daft Punk, years and years before them, the Residents all wore like big eyeball heads all the time. I mean, today we have Likely 47 is like a New York rapper who wears ski masks constantly. I mean, like the anonymity thing, it gets people somehow. People are like, who
But
is that?
because maybe it's still the same figurehead syndrome. It's just you project your own idea of the figurehead on this like template.
Yeah. I mean, at the risk of sounding like completely out of touch, I mean, like, who are the fucking guys in Weezer? Like, would I know them?
God no. They
Right?
like intentionally try to be the most like bland looking, like just the most vanilla looking things.
And I think we have a lot of those examples in like that genre of like sort of feelingsy, mostly feel goody, like surface level pop rock. And like, there's a lot of those bands coming out of like Canada today, right? Uh, I'm trying to come to terms with Arkells. You know, uh, a good friend of mine really likes Arkells, and I'm like, what's the thing? What's the thing? And I'm listening and I'm listening and listening, and it's like those guys are like guys that are not striking out on the force of their identity so much as like they're
So
like
you trust them.
writing.
They're more authentic. They have to get a good product because they're just normal guys. You know, they're not trying to like.
Well, and even that though, I think that they're like writing. I think that they're like writing a contemporary vibe with high production value, right? And I think people like they might not be able to point out what high production value is and what low production value is. Like they might not know what defines those.
It's like
But
I like
like when
that one
you,
better though.
huh? Oh yeah, right. And like it's like when you hear like Lady Gaga, you know a lot of production value. Like you know a lot of money's been spent on mastering and making the sounds distinct and finding like sort of a unique set of tones and shit, right?
Uh-huh.
To go into her mastering and like Lady Gaga, I think produces pretty okay songs with really great production, and like people respond to that,
Yeah.
right? I mean, like maybe, I mean, other than like, I mean, you see that with like Prince, right? Like I love Prince's music, and like, but Prince had like he was a great producer, and like you can see that in like 1999 is I think a song about like the party being over, right? And like time to wrap up, and everybody thinks it's like the great song, the great party anthem, right? And like he's able to do that production trick on people where you can get hoodwinked by good production and upbeat instrumentality and like just like swallow lyrics. And fortunately for Prince, like he's one of those guys who's the 5 foot tall, charismatic well of charisma. Like
Yeah.
that's just who he is. But I think a lot of people are like ride sort of an anonymous wave of like what's in, and like rather
I
than
would say there is a level of like I would go with intrigue as like a bigger overarching thing. Like anonymity creates intrigue. But David Bowie and Prince and like they had this anonymity because you didn't know there's so much they weren't giving you and you knew it. Or that's what it felt.
that's true.
Or Marilyn Manson took it there. It was like, hey, you've seen so much of me, you can't even contain what's gonna come next. Like the shock rock. It's the same,
Yeah,
like creating this intrigue, either by
yeah.
subtraction or like unboundedness. But like it's like I don't really see a lot of that intrigue. I mean, Lady Gaga, she's intriguing. At least when her
Mm-hmm.
initial fame. Now it doesn't. It's less so. But like, I mean, I think that's what keeps the Kardashians like relevant is they understand how to deprive information and create intrigue. You know?
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's like a yeah, right. And I
And,
think there's something there in terms of like between artifice and authenticity, right? Is like there's like a
yeah.
little bit of like we don't really know what any of the Kardashians are
Oh,
actually
sure. And
like,
but like
right?
Iron Wine guy, like you said, and like a sad guy in a cabin. That's intriguing. You know? You're like,
Oh
ooh,
yeah.
why is he
Well,
doing?
and it's right, and it's like self-admittedly, like at the time it was authentic, and then it became artifice,
Sure, sure.
right?
But
And I don't know.
like as an artist, like I mean, I would like David Bowie's and Prince's were very developed, like extremely
Hmm.
developed. Like maybe it didn't start out that way, but like by the time anybody heard about them, they knew what they were doing. It was very
I'd be so interested to know like the first 5 years of Prince's music making life. Like man, like what a because you're right. It just came out. Everything we've been handed down, at least, has been so distinctly Prince's fingerprints all over it, right?
yeah. Like I'm just to me, I was like, all right, did he just try a bunch of different stuff and this was one that worked, or like did he just like start here and it worked perfectly, or like that's
Yeah,
like, those are like weird questions to ask someone because maybe he doesn't even know, or like, but
yeah,
I mean, because like, you asked the same thing of like Gucci, like Takashi 69. He doesn't
oh
know.
yeah,
He doesn't know. But 10 years from now, he could probably answer that question. He's like, okay, looking back, I could see it at the time. I was just kind of like here, and then it happens, you know.
and I think that rap's an interesting study, and I think there's a lot of careers that launch before they're ready. I mean, and I was like, my instinct is to say, oh, well, the internet enables you to just put up whatever you want. But it's not quite that, right? Because like Lil Wayne has like a lot of like really rough early material that's like everywhere. And I think we can find a number of rappers who have really rough early material that gets everywhere. And like maybe that's the idea of
Like Soldier Boy,
right? And
like
is it right?
that is a horribly produced song. Not horribly, it's
Oh
bad.
yeah,
Like, but it's a good song, and it's so like it just has the intrigue. It's like, what the hell is this?
yeah,
Like, it's got my radio, and don't turn it off. Like,
yeah, right. And it's I don't know. I'm right. Is it the rap culture in some sense predates internet culture in a very similar way of like mixtapes are the primary medium to connect with the music, right? Versus like a rock band's primary means of connecting with the music is live, right? Because like you don't see a lot of like local indie bands who are like, hey man, hey, take my mixtape, like pitching their mixtape on the sidewalk. But I do run into from time to time rappers who are just very like mixtape, 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 even today. And it's like, I don't know. I think that some of that has gotten woven into the current means of music production online.
what is the modern mixtape? Is it a playlist like a Spotify? Like, if I came up to you and say like, yo man, check out my Spotify playlist, and give you a car with like a QR code or something on it,
Yeah,
like,
I don't know. I mean, I think that here in Chicago, I mean, there's still dudes with CDs.
oh sure, yeah,
I
they're
still
like,
put a I still put a suspicious CD in my computer from time to time.
yeah.
You know?
But you're the exception there, probably though. Maybe I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah. And yeah, I don't know. I think that I don't know. I like the CD for so many reasons, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the contemporary one is. I think that you'll see like outside of all that is like before you had SoundCloud as a robust sort of thing, you had right like Det Piff did rap mixtapes where they weren't a record label, they were just like sort of a promoter who would write a piece and give a star rating to a mixtape and just upload anybody's mixtape. Right. And they would like upload it, like, I think basically whatever. Like they wouldn't even really control quality. They would just upload whatever and then have like somebody write a review, whether or not they were like part of the organization or not. And they were like, it sounds like a bunch of club songs. Yeah, 3 stars. You know? And like that's what it was. And like Det Piff, I think in the early 2000s was like the place you got mixtapes online. And like they were distinctly mixtapes. It was like distinctly and I think that era was marked out by bands or rappers actually working on making a mixtape that would be like 8 songs long, and like every song would be demonstrating a different thing, right? And they would go for like the variety aspect versus like a cohesive message, you know. But I don't know, it's interesting, right? Like here we have Chance the Rapper, right, gets by on a force of charisma, you know, sort of thing. But like again, he's like one of those weird guys that's just he's never like sold anything for money. Like he's never sold an album for money. Is his notable claim to fame, right?
But that kind of works with the whole like, oh, he's so authentic and he's like a rap, but like my mom doesn't hate him, and like
he's
able to somehow toe the line of like being relevant and completely non-controversial and without being corny or like conservative.
Well, yeah, right. And I think that he comes at like a really delicate time where like the non-controversial thing is like semi-debatable, right? It's like he's not controversial in terms of being like, whoa, he swore, you know, but like that's
jail,
dropped.
Kashi.
But like he has like radical ideas of like love and things that like somehow to most people's ears have skipped right over being like trite and boring and lame.
Yeah, and it's like
I don't know,
like a bit. I mean, I'm not trying to shit on him or anything. Just a bit faux controversial.
Yeah,
like, say a bunch of like progressive slogans. Everybody's like, "Yeah, just screw those guys who don't believe it." Like there hasn't been anybody here saying that stuff around you. You isolate yourself from those people.
I mean,
never this, but
it's like never more relevant than when my friend, she paid like egregious amounts of money to see Beyonce front row. I think like a single ticket was a little over $2,000. You know, like right. And it's like the cheapest tickets were like $100 or something. You know, like it was and like we're talking stadium, right? So $100 and you can't see anything.
You can't see or hear anything, like
right. And so it was like $2,000 so that Beyonce will like her like sweat will fly onto you, right? It was like that sort of a seat, and like she has pictures from that, and it's like the sort of like celebrity picture from that show is like Beyonce with her fist up, and then it says feminist in like block white letters behind her, and you're like, but like
video was talking about that. Did you see that?
No.
Like it literally talked about this exact thing. They're like, yeah, this is controversial, but not really. Just enough that I don't actually have to say anything. Like, okay, who's gonna argue with you? Like, nobody that you're gonna hear and nobody that's relevant. Who's really gonna agree with you? You're not really saying anything.
Right, and like that's like I don't know, and that's like I've always I don't know the past like ever since I saw that it was very like how is it not? How is it?
It's almost exploitive to me. Like in
no, it is right. Like that's I don't know. It's like but people are so insistent that like it's real, and it's like I don't know. I mean,
Pussy Riot is real. Like at least 10% of them. Why? Because they've gone to jail for this stuff. That like their country. Like they're famous for going to jail for their political stances in their music. Am I saying you should do that? No, I'm not saying that. Like I mean, but like, yeah, I agree with you, man. Like that kind of bothers me. Like as maybe just like my punk roots or something like.
And it's like I don't know, right? Like we've touched on numerous times is like if a band is not authentic, it's fine, right? And like yeah, but it's something about the fact that it's like exploiting like the politics of it that seems weird to me. It's something where like the politics meet where I'm like, that seems like a little strange.
Yeah.
You know,
like I was like local show there. I was like, and some like one. All chick band was like, and if you're against blah blah blah, 2 women loving each other, blah. It's like, dude, you're in a dive bar. Everybody hasn't voted in 10 years or is completely liberal. Like, nobody's.
Yeah. Like, what was it? I was at an industrial show a couple months ago, and for band Hyde. It was a really good show. Industrial might be the wrong word. Who knows? But there was like a guy in his synth to make the giant wall of sound, and a woman who was in like super torn clothing, basically screaming, and it was cool. It was a cool show. And then some guy,
That's pretty industrial.
what's up?
Sounds pretty industrial.
Yeah, right. I think it's or it was just noise. I don't know. But some guy in between songs, because this one actually had songs. It wasn't just a solid block of music. Some guy told her to take it off, and then she like immediately launched into the next song, and then it was like they were like changing equipment over or something, and she was like, "Hey, like to that dude who told me to take it off, like suck my dick," and then just like went to the next song, and I was like, "There we go. There's my good dose of politics," Yeah. Yeah, it was a funny show. I showed up very much like I'm dressed now, and it was like everybody was in like black leather, and I was like,
yeah, they're like, "You're in the right place."
Hey. Hey, I listen at my house. But yeah.
To my dad.
Yeah. But I don't know. I think that the Beyonce thing, and like, again, it's like adopting all of these things that are like the progressive values that sell now, right? Because like progressivism has met this weird thing now where progressivism really sells, right? And that's like we're seeing.
It's I think it not be progressive,
right? Yeah. Well, and I think it sells. I think it sells on the appeal of like that it will be discussed beyond the performance, right? Like part of the thing for like Gillette is Gillette's thing where we're like now Gillette is the progressive razor company, but like we'll still charge twice as much for pink razors, right? Like we're progressive and we want men to do better, but we're still going to overcharge women. Like, so we're seeing like the messaging not aligning with their values, right? But Gillette like is preceded by Nike, is preceded by that stupid Keurig shit. Do you remember that? Like Keurig, like, right? And like Keurig totally played on like faux progressive values that like triggered like a viral campaign where they paid nothing in marketing, but were in the news for like a month, right? And Gillette is like preying on like progressive value because it gets them in the news continually, right? And when you're able to consistently, like even now I'm marketing technically for Beyonce because like the adoption of a progressive political stance is like safe enough that it doesn't garner haters because like who's really against it? Not many people, but it's like radical enough that it like causes a little bit of acclaim, right? Versus like if Beyonce did the opposite and was like, man, I sure do love, white nationalism. Like then that would be like controversial and right.
Patriarchy.
Right. And then we would be like, oh my God. And then she would get closed out. Right. Cause like, that's like the controversial politics today are conservatism, and like maybe rightfully so. I don't know. But like, yeah. I don't know. And I think that it's really easy. And that's like the key though. I think that like a lot of bands like Weezer and some more anonymous sort of bands are like feel goody and have created this like safe aura around themselves by being like also progressive, right? Even if it's progressivism by like omission, like Weezer just hasn't said that they hate people.
Uh-huh.
So like we trust that they are like welcoming and good. And like there's no controversy and they're like this safe harbor Weezer, right? And so many other bands, like occupy this like, oh, well, we're four white dudes who are completely anonymous, but you buy into like our political values in addition to pretty well produced music.
Yeah.
I don't know. All this to say, I think that it's an interesting time. People should put out all their shit. I think there's like, I don't know, there's less, as much pressure as there is now to think about what success means. Like, there's less of a standard of success now than there ever has been. Right? As much as there's a gatekeeper in terms of getting your production values high enough to rank on Spotify, like
unless you go SoundCloud and then
yeah, right. Well, right, and that's like a low bar relative to the past anyway. Right? And there's always going to be acts like I'm puzzled over Billie Eilish. I'm like, why though? Why? Like, why is it a thing? Like, why? It's just like mysterious to me because it's like some 17-year-old and there's already like a documentary about like what her life is like. I'm like, what does this say? Like, I didn't have anything to say that was worthwhile at 17. Like, why would she? And like I'm not saying
lyrics clearly have. I mean, they're. Our music's nice to listen to. She reminds me of a teeny bopper 2019 Instagram version of a young Bjork.
Oh, maybe. I think that the sound is similar. Yeah.
Like, and the same, like, endearing, like just physically, she is like this anti-mentality of, like, she just looks like you look bad intentionally, but not really, but kinda, like almost nondescriptly bad, which makes you descript, like.
Yeah, well, and it's like, I don't know, but like something, I don't know what it is, right? Because like, I think you're right that the intrigue is there, and that's definitely what's moving it. But I don't know that I like, for some reason, I've always trusted Bjork to be authentically
Bjork,
right?
There's no question that, like, Bjork is going to be Bjork. I mean, I think that's also like a bit of, we don't, as a culture, if you're trying to make an entertainment industry or any kind of like public figure status, like, you can't be you.
Yeah, well, and this is like, yeah.
I take that back. You can. I think Trump is a great example of that. Like, he's very much like, oh, he's honest. I'm like, he's authentic. He's not honest, but homeboy is authentic. Like, no problem. You know, like, how's he feel today? You're gonna know. You know, like, and so there is that, but it almost requires you to go to these. You either need to be like faux controversy, like focus group, boardroomed, like presentation, or just like set yourself on fire and start running. Like, the middle ground, I think, is like, we've kind of destroyed this middle class, I think, of normal.
Yeah.
That not in just a statistical way, you know?
Yeah, and I could see that. I could see definitely that there's like, yeah, there's the developed, right? There's the developed identity that's been like created in the lab, right? In the way that like NSYNC had like a lab created sort of vibe.
Sure.
Or there's like the homegrown eccentric. I don't know. And that's like, yeah.
Music's a good example of that. They were just so like what's even there's not even an adjective I can think of it. Like, dumpy, I guess. And it was like so you know, like,
yeah. God, Weezer. I don't know. They really, I mean, right? 2 albums in the past 6 months.
I mean, they're doing something right. So
yeah,
they're back in their spotlight.
Getting it out there, but I don't know. Is it worth being out there? Always the question.
Different conversation. Dude, I really enjoyed this, man. We should do this again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, do you have an Instagram, or is that your thing?
I do. No, I do. Photophagy. PHOTOPHAGY. It's like photo and then phage for eater, so it's light eater.
Oh, okay, cool.
If we're being Latin.
All right, we'll be Latin. And mine's the Cam Gillette, because Cam Gillette was already taken. So, but definitely cool. Check us out. This will be online at some point in our lives. And thanks so much for talking to you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Talking to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Be in touch.
All right.